I'm Mike Kelly from Project Healing Waters Omaha. Tonight we're going to tie a couple of flies using CDC and talk about how to fish with CDC flies and how to deal with tying with CDC. So for tonight, the first fly is going to be an Elk Caddis. And before I really get into the whole, details about the fly and everything, I thought I'd kind of do a little bit of background on CDC. A lot of us know what it is, but there's kind of some pros and cons to it and everything. So I'm going to share that's the right one. Yeah. So on our dry flies, aside from foam or synthetics, for dry flies and emergers, we normally use hollow hair and stiff hackle to create enough surface tension to float our flies, like in this picture with a stimulator. But CDC is neither stiff nor hollow. So how does it really help us help dry flies to float? The CDC really stands for Col de Canard. I guess loosely in French, that's duck's butt. The feather comes from just under the tail, and it surrounds a preen gland that produces an oil that the duck uses while it's preening to coat its feathers, and it keeps them water resistant. If the water, especially in cold weather, if the water would come up against the skin, quickly the bird would die or whatever. So they use this oil to kind of coat their feathers. But a lot of people say that CDC is special because of the oil that's on it. I highly doubt that it's the oils that really make it float, because I guess my argument is that commercially packaged CDC, they of course pluck it from the bird and it may have the oils on it, but then they thoroughly wash it, they prepare them for dyeing, and then the dyeing process is going to also probably remove some of the oils, and then drying them for packaging and everything. To me, that would leave little or no oil left on the feather. So I think it has more to do with the physical properties of the feather. So if you look at these three feathers, they're just real fluffy and fuzzy and everything. But if you really zoom in on it, it's kind of like peacock herl or ostrich herl, where you've got the rachis going up through the middle, and then you have these barbs coming off the sides. But then off of each barb is little hair-like barbules that come off of those. And the key with CDC is that even those barbs that hang off of the rachis they're not stiff at all. They're like hairs themselves. And so the little microscopic little hairs that hang off the ends trap air bubbles. And although there may be some oils inherent in the feather just because of where they kind of grew in the bird, CDC does float. If you took a CDC feather and just set it on the water, it would definitely float. But I think it's those hair-like barbs that really trap the air and cause that surface tension. So the CDC and Elk Caddis is it was developed by Hans Weilenmann of the Netherlands. Um, it was designed to he had fished the our popular fly in the U.S. is the Elk Caddis, but that rides really high on the surface film, almost like when I showed that it rides real high on the surface film. And caddis flies, when they emerge, they don't float on the water for a very long amount of time. They skitter across the water and they take off. And so in Hans's mind, and I kind of understand what he's saying, if a caddisfly is able to float high on the water like that, he's very likely to just go ahead and take off, and the fish won't catch it when they try to come up and eat it. So there's Mick. Welcome, Mick. So what his concept was that he wanted a fly that would still float, but it would be a little bit lower in the surface film, because that's going to make a fish think that I can catch this one. And so out of a bunch of hatching caddis flies, it would grab that one that's floating a little bit lower before it would grab one that's floating higher. So the hook is really have to make sure it's a standard dry fly hook, a light wire hook. 12 to 22. I think these are probably, for caddis flies, probably 14 to 18 is probably the most common of what everybody would use them as. The thread is UTC 70. I'm actually going to use a GSP, and I'll talk about a little bit of stuff with that. In any color that actually matches the CDC and the wing that you're doing. There's different colors of caddis in different parts of the world, and sometimes even in the same area. In the Black Hills, there's a dark caddis and a light caddis. The underwing is part of the CDC, and then the wing itself is fine-tipped elk or deer hair. So I will switch back. And we'll go to the materials. For this fly, not a lot of materials. Adjust this a little bit. Talking about, I'm going to use deer hair, a hook, and some CDC. So for this fly, I've already kind of pre-selected some. I'll talk about this more when I go back to the Vice camera, but there's different shapes of CDC feathers. Some of them are little puffs. Some of them are kind of more oval, semper fly, and some of them are like a wedge for the thread. For this particular fly, I like to use the ones that are a little bit more oval. And again, I'll talk about that more in the Vice camera. I'm going to tie this on a size 12 because it out a little bit. It's easier to do it on the camera. Again, probably 14 to 18 is the most common. And then I'm going to use a for the hook, Semperfly Nano Silk for the thread. And take a few of them out here on my, I have a magnet pad on my cameras here. Vice pedestal here. Zoom out a little bit. Throw a few hooks on there so I can have them kind of ready. Now, with this Semperfly, if you used it, or Vivus is another one. Here's some white Vivus. Any of these gel spun threads, the biggest complaint most people have is that they're very slippery. They're very strong and thin, so you don't end up with a lot of bulk. But they're like if I was to take this, I'd take a long tag piece here and wrap around three or four times and go back over it. I can still pull that away because that thread is so slippery and so strong. So I finally got broke down and bought some thread wax. It's very similar to the in makeup. As a matter of fact, a lot of these dubbing waxes that you buy are part this. It's mostly beeswax, but there's a formula to make these thread waxes. I don't know what it is. I bought this from actually this is from Semperfly as well. It's called Fly Tires Wax. Um, so the idea is if you take your thread and run it through that wax a few times, it makes your thread kind of sticky and it just makes this a game changer. So now when I put this on the hook, I can do a few wraps over it and pull, and I'm bending the hook. So that's not going to pull out. There's a lot more advantages of waxing the thread. If you ever watch Davey McPhail, he always says wax your thread, before he does certain things. If you're ever tying any materials on, like say squirrel tail is slippery with standard thread. If you use this wax like this, it really helps that thread grip anything that it touches. Another thing is if I'm doing different tying steps and my thread's bouncing around like this, using standard thread that's slippery, as your bobbin is swinging around like that, it's loosening up that thread. And when you put the wax on it like that, it's tacky enough to hold it in place. So, you can do a lot more things with it. So for the CDC and Elk Caddis, I'm going to take my thread all the way back to the bend of the hook. Again, this hook that I'm using, I just got these. It's a Daiichi 1180, and it's a standard dry fly hook, but it has a mini barb. And so I think a lot of the fishing that I do locally is for meat. So I don't necessarily always crush the barb. But if I'm fishing for trout, or, especially like cutthroats in Colorado or something where I want to make sure I release them safely, I can easily pinch that barb down with, anything. So I'm not selling hooks or anything, but these were kind of cheap from, where did I get them? Cheap, Jay Stockard, I think. So take the thread back to the bend of the hook, and then I'm going to take a CDC feather. If you look at this, might be kind of easier for you to see that yellowish one. If you look at this feather, it's kind of oval shaped. You've got some barbs on the sides here that are kind of sticking out, and it's rounded over like that. This green one is about the same. I think, yeah. So this is a natural gray one. But if you look at it, these barbs are long, but when you really fold them all up to the side, they're all pretty much the same length. There's a couple of them that are shorter, but they're because they've been broken. So with CDC, you get a lot of them that are wedge shaped like this, where the top is flat, and all these barbs come up. And when you stroke them like that and up to a point, you end up with all of the barbs, closely tied together there. I'll use this yellow one. So with this particular feather, as I pull on that, you can see a lot of these pull out to the sides. And for this pattern, that's actually what you want. So with my thread at the end there, I'm going to wrap over this feather a couple of times with just some kind of medium loose wraps, and then start to pull back to where I get a little tuft of CDC there. And then I'm going to, whoops, make sure that's tight. Then I'm going to come underneath that and then wrap over it again. And what I'm trying to do is trap that tip down really tight. Let me do that again with it zoomed in better. But a lot of people do this method for CDC where you kind of fold up that tip and then wrap, and then you go back over those tips. And that just kind of sandwiches that in and really makes it secure. So I'm going to go all the way back to the eye of the hook. And then I can come with a hackle pliers, just so I don't lose control of it, and just grab that butt end. And now you don't need to twist this, but I'm just going to take this and start wrapping it forward. And that makes up the body. Now you see when you get to about the middle here, those barbs start hanging backwards. Just kind of stroke those back like you would, like say like a soft hackle. And just keep wrapping this forward. Till you get to the front. Make a couple of tight wraps over that, a couple in the front, and then I'll let go of that hackle pliers. Now I'll really get tight and tie that down. Wrap it in good. And then I can cut away the stem. Now all of these little CDC fibers that hang off, those could be legs, those could be a trailing shuck. They'll just kind of add to the wing when I put the wing on. I'm going to zoom out some. And I'm going to take this deer hair. This is a Varner's. I think it's a grade 2. It's a late season sculpin olive big bug hair is what it's for. But actually the tips are just about perfect for a size, say 12, 10. So what I'm going to do is grab a bunch of deer hair here, and that's a little bit more than what I'll need. What I'm going to do to make it what I need is just kind of grab these tips and get rid of all the short stuff. And then just kind of rejudge it. That's going to be way. I will just kind of eyeball that, and I think that's going to be way too much hair for that wing. So I'll take just a little bit out of there, maybe about a quarter of it, and toss it. And then I'll put it in my hair stacker. It's easier to do when I'm down low. Tap it a few times and get those butts aligned. Now, I know I want my wing to go in this direction, so that's the way I took it out of the stacker. So I'll zoom in a little bit more. And then I'll grab those tips. And then I'll measure it up against the hook. I want this to be just past, I want those tips to be just past the bend of the hook. So I'm measuring it with my thumb and finger against the eye of the hook here. And then I'm going to come with these fingers and grab it there. So now I have that measurement. I'm going to come over the waste bin and cut it right about right there. So now I'll bring that back over and lay it right at the front of the hook. You can see my thread is about an eye length back from the eye. So I'm going to set that hair right at the end of the eye there. And I'm pinching this hair. Let me zoom in some so you can see what I'm doing. This hair is like right on top of the hook shank, right behind the eye. I'm going to spin it so I make sure the thread comes back toward my fingers. And then I'm going to come down on top of that hair and just pull straight down. And then I'm going to actually go through those tips a little bit. Pull again. So now that hair is flared, but it's right. If you look at the bottom is fine. And it's all right on top there. And that's not going to spin around because I went back through it a couple of times. So what I'm going to do now is just go ahead and whip finish. I got to kind of reach out at an angle to get around that eye there. Pull it tight. Wonder how this works with Semperfli. Not very good, but it worked. Basically on the end of my whip finish tool, it's not a real sharp like where it would cut me, but I kind of chiseled it off a little bit to make, ground it down a little bit to make it kind of a chisel point to break the thread. Makes it so you don't have to pick up your scissors. So that's the CDC and Elk. And if you want to use any glue, just make sure you just use a little bit, and maybe right where that thread and hair and everything meet, you can put a little bit right at that base. Like that. That'll soak in and dry.
Hey, Mike,
Yes, sir.
when you made the whip finish and you went between the eye and the I guess it's called the neck of the fly,
Right.
wouldn't you go over the neck of the fly just or not?
I've done that, and you can. The problem is, if you whip finish over a thick area, like
Yeah,
even though I compress that hair, you've still got some density there. You've got some thickness. And if you whip finish over that, it's likely to kind of push back against that thread and make it come away. If I went over the bundle like that,
yeah,
I would probably do like a good 5-turn whip finish, especially with this kind of thread. You can do a 6-7 turn whip finish and it'll pull through just fine. If you start trying to do that with 70 denier regular thread, you're going to end up breaking the thread. But so the reason that I did it behind the eye, if you remember, we're zoomed in pretty good here. I wrapped around the tuft right there. You want to take 2 or 3 turns there just to flare the hair and flare that head. And it makes it like a sunburst, kind of a rounded thing there. But then I actually did a turn through the hair itself, which brought me forward. So then around the eye of the hook is where, I would do the whip finish. If I was just doing this, another way to do this actually is put the hair up there and leave the tips long and wrap it around there and then come back here like a lot of people do. And then when the tips are done and you have your thread wrapped around, go ahead and cut the tips like that. And then you've got a flat head in front. This way of doing it is cutting it first and then flaring it like that is just another way of doing it. When you do that, it's better to whip finish around the eye itself. Another thing, this hair kind of flares up quite a bit. And if it's too much for you, you can take that hair and just kind of work it against those thread wraps and then pull it back and it'll kind of lay it down. So it basically creases it against the thread wraps and then it kind of lays it back. Now the key with this fly is all of this CDC stuff hanging off the sides. When this thing floats in the water, it's going to be floating like that, and these CDC fibers are just going to kind of hang out to the sides. And these being just so wispy and hair-like, those are just going to like move in the water. And so in still water, if there's any caddis in still water, this is a perfect fly. Even in moving water, the moving water is actually going to make these things just like go crazy. So this adds a lot of lifelike action to the fly, but also makes it ride real low in the surface film to make it look like a caddis that's not going to take off right away. And they definitely outfish the naturals, or not necessarily the naturals, but the regular elk hair caddis, the altroth fly. And that's what Hans Wallen said, was he wanted it to float lower in the surface film. He tried altroth's elk hair caddis, and there were a lot of them that refused it and took the naturals, and so he wanted something that floated lower in the surface film. I'll talk more about actually fishing with CDC on the next fly, and you're going to think I messed up on this one. This is an ugly fly, but this is the IOBO. Mike Miller's here. Welcome, Mike Miller. So this is done with like a green CDC. The IOBO, it stands for "It Ought to Be Outlawed." I have a pattern sheet for it here. The IOBO humpy. IOBO is for "It Ought to Be Outlawed." It was developed by Jack Tucker of Pennsylvania. He tried to tie the fly that we just tied, the CDC and elk, without instructions. And he tied the feather in by the butt and wrapped it forward. If you remember on the CDC and elk, I tied it in by the tip, or by the tip of the feather, and wrapped it forward. He tied it in by the butt and wrapped it forward. And what he ended up with was like a tuft of fibers sticking out over the eye. And so he left him there, and he thought that the result caught fish when nothing else did. So then he tried tying it in by the butt just behind the eye, which is how this humpy is. Spiral it back to the bend and then pulled the remainder back over like a shellback. So the humpy version actually, proved more effective than the original IOBO. So I'll go back to the materials camera. And I'm going to go ahead and put the materials down here so you can see them. There it is. One one feather and the hook. So I'm gonna go back, and they call it a guide fly if it's really easy to tie and very effective. This is probably one of those flies that would fall into that category. There's actually a few different ways people have kind of developed to tie this. But first way that I'm going to do this is actually the right way. I guess the original way. The right way is the way that's easiest for you. So I'm just going to put some wax on my thread, and I'm going to start at the eye, come back a little ways just to make sure that thread's secure, and then come back toward the front. So I'm going to take this CDC feather. You can see it's kind of long fibers. You want to make sure they're at least longer than the hook shank. So if I hold that up there, you can see they're kind of longer than the hook. I'm going to just take this by the very tip, and I'm going to tie it once around the feather, and then I'm going to come around the back and do one more turn. So what I'm doing is I'm making this feather 90 degrees to the hook shank. And there's a reason for that. This part of the feather, you can kind of see how thick it is there, is kind of fragile. And if I was to just tie this in forward and start wrapping it, or tie it in backwards and start wrapping it, and a lot of people do that, you have the risk of breaking the hackle stem before you even get started, and then you're going to get frustrated and cause problems. So now that I have that feather tied in, I'm going to bring my thread back to the back of the hook. And there we are. Oh, actually, let me come back here. Because I want to take that tip, now that I have that feather tied in right, I want to take that tip and just bring it back along the hook shank here and tie that down. So when you tie it in like this, you really don't have anything to clip off. And now I'll bring it back to the end of the hook. So now I'm going to take this CDC feather, and I'm going to take 2 or 3 wraps here. And by then, let me put it in a hackle pliers. There we go. Back to where we were. Put it in a hackle pliers. Grab it by the tip here. And this is a little fuzzy at the base. I'm going to pull some of these away. Those really caused a lot of bulk. So what I'm going to do is just start wrapping this back. And then as you start to wrap back and spiral back, just take those barbs that hang out and just fold them back. So now what we're left with is an awkward looking paintbrush at the end of it. And I'm going to take a few wraps right back here. Just hold that down, then I can get rid of that hackle plier. And then spiral forward. And that's another reason I use this nano silk. It's a very strong thread. And so this is a delicate fly. But with this stronger thread like this, it's not so likely to get shredded by the fish's teeth. So I'm going to take that, all of that stuff and fold it forward. And you can use your thumb to just kind of press it forward like that. And then hold everything tight and then come over it a few times. Pull nice and tight. And then come through about half of this. And then grab the rest of it. And just make a little bit of a head there, just to kind of help stand that up. Whip finish right at the eye. And that's the fly. Now, on this feather that I used, a lot of the tips end up uneven here. Zoom in some. If they're real long, what you can do is come in and pinch the ends of them and make it kind of more even. Any of this stuff hanging off the back, I leave that because that's a trailing shuck, that's legs, that's anything. But this is a fantastic emerger pattern. If you ever have, you can tie these down in really small sizes and it'd be a lot more feather to work with. But this one I had a longer feather to work with. There's like a light gray one that I had in my box. But the key with this CDC is that it's going to float just in the surface film, and it's going to look like a crippled adult, like a mayfly that tried to evolve into an adult and had a little trouble or whatever. But again, all this CDC is just going to move around in the surface film, and it's really going to look alive. Another way you can do this, and I'll do it with, because that feather that I have is kind of a dark green, I'm going to grab some peacock herl. And I'll do kind of a little bit of a variant here. So again, I'll wax my thread and get it started toward the front. At this time, I'm going to come all the way back to the back. And this is if you have CDC feathers that aren't long enough, having a little trouble making this work out. I'm going to take a CDC feather and make sure that it's twice as long as the hook shank, and I'll tie it in back there. And then I'll go ahead and tie this up the hook shank a ways, clip off the excess. And then I'm going to take a couple peacock curls, come up here and just kind of break off that first half inch or 3/4 of an inch. Tie that down. I lost one of them. I'll take those and wrap them around my thread. And wrap forward. So now I have a peacock body. And I'll unwrap this. From my thread. So that thread helped reinforce that peacock body. And then I'll take this forward and tie it off. Wrap a little bit in front. Now again, if it's too long, which this is a little bit too long, just come in there and just pinch off those tips. I usually don't like to cut it if I don't have to. That's kind of strong. So you still have a wing and you still have that hump back, but now you have a peacock body.
You know, might be interesting to try with that is ostrich herl or ostrich feathers as a wrap.
For the body?
Yeah.
Yes. You could use dubbing.
Yep.
Could do the, it's interesting. Tim Flagler we just did that twist dubbing thing the other day. Tim Flagler did a little nymph with a twist dubbing. What time is it? 6:52. Where he took 2 colors of superfine dubbing. I think I did it on the X Caddis and the what was it? X Caddis and the Mayfly version, the Comparadun. Took 2 colors of dubbing. Let me zoom out. I'm showing you something and I'm not zoomed out. So I have a real light cream color. Just do about a 1.5 to 2 inches of a light color, and then say like a darker color. And you're doing a real tight dubbing noodle, just real tight, but light on top and dark on the bottom. And then take a test clip and grab it in the middle. And then when you fold that up, whoops, fell out of my hand. tie that up, you can tie it back toward the bend of the hook, and then just take that and twist it. I want to go clockwise, I think. So what you end up with is like a candy cane dubbing noodle. That would be fun. And wrap it forward. And then when you take that and wrap it forward, you've got a modeled body. I think I should have gone the other way. Any questions on CDC? Oh, I wanted to talk about fishing it some. So I was never really much of a fan of CDC because it just seemed so like soft and frilly and everything. It just didn't seem delicate and not very strong, like it would last very much. So I tried some different ways of fishing it. And what I found was you can take, like, I saw a lot of fish rising to an unknown thing that was emerging. It was like fish were rising all over the place. So I put this on as an emerger. Not, I think it might have been an IOBO. I tried different ones. That was one of the ones I used, and I caught one fish on it, and then that fly was done. It just wouldn't float anymore. It just looked like nasty and greasy or whatever. So I tried a merger pattern. It was called like a, what do they call that thing? Um, Name escapes me, but it has CDC for a wing. And it's an emerger. Same thing. I threw it out there and it floated just in the surface film, just slowly like sunk, caught a fish on it, and then it was done. So what you need to do with CDC, you can't really put a floatant. I was going to grab it out of my vest. I don't have it here, but they have like a gel floatant that you can put on you can kind of, they call it grease your line, your tippet and the front part of your leader, and it'll just help that not really sink below the surface film. You can put that on some flies, like deer hair flies, different dry flies. You can rub it on there, and it keeps those materials from soaking up water, and it helps them float longer. If you put that kind of gel stuff on CDC, it would just like completely grease it up, and it wouldn't work. So what you need to do with CDC, and I tried it a couple of ways, is actually to take that fly in the water. Normally when you're fishing, you have water close by. So take it in the water, just shake it around and just rinse it out. Make sure that the fish slime is all off of the CDC. And then against your jeans, or if you have an Amadou patch, they have a little foam patch that dries flies or whatever. Just like squeeze that just to help squeeze the water out of it. Kind of rub it against your pants a little bit, and then use a dry desiccant. Frog's Fanny is kind of a popular one, but it's just a dry powder desiccant. Put that into that fly, and then that thing's going to float great for another maybe a fish or two. That's probably the downfall of fishing with CDC is one fish and it's slimed and it's done, unless you do a little bit of work to kind of get it all cleaned up. Of course, the advantage is, like I said, once that CDC hits the water, I've seen it on YouTube where they put a fly just on a glass of water, and just those hairs, just even on a glass of water, they just kind of move. So you can imagine with any kind of waves or current in the water or whatever, they're going to move. They use them a lot on nymphs and underwater. Um, they still move a lot more than any soft tackle would because they're just so hair-like. So give it a shot. That IOBO humpy, it's a real good fly that catches a lot of fish. Um, the CDC and elk, I think, probably fish wise is probably going to surpass the elk hair caddis that's been around for so many years. I don't remember when Altroth, uh, you know, created that fly. At least 70s, probably further back. The elk hair caddis, but that's been a go-to for everybody. The CDC and Elk Caddis, I think, raises the bar because, again, it makes that fly look vulnerable because it's floating further down in the surface film than something that's up on the top of the surface film and ready to fly away. Everything's about vulnerability of insects. So, anybody having questions or comments or ideas about this stuff?